I'm delighted to start the conference on such a positive note. Thank you very much for supplying that. It's time for me now to do one last thing, which is to introduce our keynote speaker and get started. Describes himself as a digital sociologist, analyst, and also author. He is the principal at Altimeter, a consultancy in the US that focuses on disruptive technologies. Having dinner with him last night, it was very clear that what's important to our speaker is the idea that new technologies don't go out into a greenfield site. On the contrary, they are dealing with existing infrastructure, existing culture, existing ways of doing business. That's something that we all share in common. As we're trying to change perhaps the way our businesses think about learning, we have to consider the concepts, the technology, the thoughts that are already in place. How do we overcome them? I don't know. But fortunately, I'm sure our principal speaker does here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brian Solis.
Good morning. Good morning. Wow. So I am excited that you're all awake. I appreciate your time and attention. As Don said, I am a digital anthropologist, but not by training, but by need. I study disruptive technology for a living. What does that mean? Well, I live in Silicon Valley, so you can't go 2 blocks without hearing about the next startup. I have helped and advised over 1,000 startups in my career, and the one thing that's clear is that technology is part of our life. It's not going anywhere. It's only going to get more relentless and a little bit crazier as we go. If anyone in this room suffers from shiny object syndrome, I empathize. There are detox centers for us. But let me share a story with you, because nothing says the future of learning technology like a PowerPoint deck. What you're looking at is the cover of my latest book, which is called What's the Future of Business, which you'll notice there in the background, big letters of WTF, which also stands for What's the Future? And the reason why that is on the cover of a book, which, by the way, a business publisher, it's not the call that you want to take from your author. I've got this idea for a title. I'd love to put those 3 letters on the cover. But the reason why I want to share this story with you is because this is what the presentation is about today. We need to show up differently to these challenges that we're faced. I'm inspired to hear that you actually see things as getting better, and they should. I'm a hopeless optimist. But I am also a realist, and I work within enterprise organizations every day. And the thing that I see is culture and politics and change issues, lack of a sense of urgency, incredible inabilities to make decisions efficiently. And it all comes down to us and the challenges that we all face, right? Lack of resources, lack of budget, lack of support, lack of understanding. That book, it's my 7th, but it's the first where I decided to take my own medicine. See, studying digital anthropology is a need because I've noticed that it wasn't just technology having an effect on us or our ability to learn or our ability to do things better. It was having an effect on how we go throughout life. So I started to study then, how do people read once you start using a tablet? What's different about how you read on a tablet versus how you read on a book? What triggers something to share it? And I learned a lot, to the point where I had to redesign what a book could be. And the inspiration for it was, if I had to invent or reinvent the textbook for a classroom, what would it look like? And some of those lessons are some of the things I'm going to share with you this morning, because at the end of the day, the book looks nothing like a book. It actually looks what I call an analog app, which meant that how we approach something, right, as an author, I could have just said, I'm going to write a book. It's going to look like a rectangle. It's going to be on the same type of paper you know and are familiar with. It's going to be a Times New Roman font. But I would have missed the opportunity to appeal to you in a way that you're learning, or as you're being rewired each day, to connect with you a little bit more effectively. I collect, or used to collect, fountain pens. Now, they just collect dust. When I pick one up, because I feel sorry for them sitting there, I realize that I've lost muscle memory in my fingers. It feels foreign to hold a pen. And that is because now I am an expert thumb typer. It's one of the ways that we're learning how to adapt, and I call this digital Darwinism. We are the last generation to know what the Kodak moment meant. Now we have the Instagram moment or the Snapchat moment. But the point is that technology and society evolve. We have to not only adapt and evolve along with it, but everything about how we approach an opportunity or a problem also needs to evolve. And that's where we come in. Because we keep waiting for leaders to lead, but they don't. They manage, and that's part of the problem. So we need to manage up. We need to lead upward. And part of the challenge that we're facing is that technology has always been something that has been introduced from the top down. I mean, think about it. Any one of us who join a company, we're given a standard issue laptop, maybe a tablet now. You get a phone and you get an email address. But now, you have a Facebook. You might have your own smartphone. Maybe some of you have a Twitter account. And these are things that you're bringing into the organization. And as a result, you're empowered through technology. And you're starting to change from the bottom up how technology works. How you use technology as a human being is probably not how you use technology in your job. And that's part of the problem with learning infrastructures, because we're telling people how it's going to be. We're using maybe the latest technology, but we're already working against how you work. The future is not just about changing how we approach learning. The future is how we recognize the value of a human being within the organization. We are change agents. We are all becoming digital anthropologists, and we are all now fighting for the future of engagement, to make a true connection with someone, to not just teach them and help them learn, but to help them become relevant and empowered, and to help them become who they set out to be. When I approach organizations around learning, it's incredible how many hands are involved and how many politics get in the way of doing things that matter. What I believe is that nothing is going to happen unless you push forward. Last night we were talking over dinner about bypassing legacy. And what I mean by that is you have legacy investments, you have legacy processes, you have legacy methodologies, your philosophy, your vision. These are all based on how things worked. You've probably gotten very good, very efficient at making those things work. But what I'm here to tell you is that the future is different. And how you approach it can't be how you approach things in the past. The future is not what it used to be. This is a scene from Back to the Future. And if you look at the top date, the future was 2015. And when you look at how they envisioned the future, this is funny. This is what we were supposed to dress like. It's horrible. We don't dress like that. Things are still pretty much the way they were. But our inability to push forward is actually what's working against us. We sort of undermine what the future could be on our own. excuses, challenges, frustrations, quitting. We are the people who need to push forward, because if we don't push forward, other people are going to push back. And it has to be driven from a true sense of empathy, that you care about the people that you're trying to help. Because if they don't get that help, they're going to find it somewhere else. This is a cassette tape for anyone in this room that's never seen one before. I used to play audio. What's funny is that when I put this slide together, the first thing I remembered was having a cassette tape and a pencil. Does anybody remember that relationship? Yes. We're probably also the last generation to know what that meant too. But these words that I share are from Steve Jobs, and he talked about how the future was going to be about a computer generation. This was in 1983. This is the year before he released the Mac. And he talked about how we were going to carry these books around with us that were essentially the future of computing, which we all know now as the iPad. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because in 1983, computing was pretty dominant around DOS. Things were going on a certain path. The way we thought about computing was pretty baked in. And here comes this maverick who says, we're going to start to do things differently. And with his vision, he created a splinter on the path that we were marching on, willingly, by the way. The point of this is that we're marching on a path, willingly, and we might be marching in the wrong direction. We might need to create our own splinters, and that starts with vision. If you've read Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, I have a play on those words that I think are really appropriate for these times, and that is, the dilemma's innovator. The dilemma is that we actually don't really understand the people that we're trying to teach, or how people are learning, or what they want to learn, or what really connects with them, or what their aspirations are. And this is sort of a foundation for design thinking. But design thinking takes vision. What are you trying to do? What are you really trying to do, and why? Technology is a constant. That's a given. Yes, we're always going to be faced with new tech that's going to do things better, faster. I'd say cheaper, but I'm not sure about that. And we're surrounded by disruption in every case. It could make you dizzy just thinking about all the options that you have and how you could possibly get any of this implemented in a reasonable time before it's already outdated. But we're learning to learn differently. We're learning that technology has human impact, behavioral impact. That if we could better understand that, we could use technology as an enabler instead of as a solution. No shortage of opportunities exist. Everybody's talking about, well, massive online courses. Oh, we have to implement that. That's the next big thing. But the more we jump on trends, the more we become reactive to them. And technology starts to drive us instead of us driving it, and how it works, and how it helps us, and how it benefits us. I actually see technology as part of the solution, but also as part of the problem. And I think we're consumed by it. I certainly know that we're consumed by it in our daily lives. Every time I get into a lift, it's amazing how few eyeballs I can connect with. And they don't even have service. I know it. I try it. But they just can't look up. When you look at the gap between these two things, floppy disks and VHS tapes and Betamax and mini disks, and you look on the other side of all of the latest and greatest, there's always going to be a divide. What separates us from the divide is empathy. You have so much technology before you. You have this incredible revolution in social media. And yet, when you look at how businesses are employing it, internally and also externally. It's incredibly antisocial. It's just another channel to carry out a legacy vision that hasn't adapted to not just the times, but to how we go through these times and what moves us. Social media is less about channels and more about social. And what does social mean? It means a conversation, it means listening, it means engagement, it means community. It means investing in something where you're not dictating it, you're part of it, you're shaping it, you're cultivating it. And when you can understand that, you can bring those principles into your organization to employ these new social technologies in ways that are natural, that are native. And that's what this is about. Because if we don't think about how we're going to amend our processes or the systems that govern it, if we can't change how we do things to be more human, then no matter how much technology we employ, it's always going to work or not work in the same way it always hasn't worked. To change that means that we have to make technology invisible. And to make it invisible, it means that we have to understand you. When you look at a website on your tablet, you're already making technology visible. The person who designed that website may be brilliant, may be one of the best web or UX designers in the world. But he's already basing that on legacy. The tablet is different in how you interact with it. And the only time you really do that on a website on a tablet is so that you can blow up a hyperlink so you can click it. And the experience is already broken. It's no longer native. It's no longer culturally significant to you. It's now foreign, and now I am making you click on a path that you are not comfortable with. I'm asking you to come out of your comfort zone, and instead, I need to learn your comfort zone and build around you. That's the problem with a lot of technology today. It is wonderful, but we're adopting it. We're creating it for the sake of technology, not for the effect it could have. The best technologies that are invisible have changed your life, and you might not even realize it. How people learn is changing. It is different than how you and I learned. We have to learn about learning. And that means we have to change. This is one of my favorite quotes. We all talk about changing the world. We never talk about changing ourselves. We think it's up to someone else, waiting for directives or leadership to open this magical door that they're finally going to wake up one morning and see everything that they've been missing. That doesn't happen, right? The people who give us our budgets live in a world that is so disconnected from reality, I'm amazed they can get through the day. But that's because they're surrounded by shareholders or stakeholders and decision makers, and they work in conference rooms where they sort of miss out on life. Probably the closest they get these days is because someone forced an iPhone or a tablet in their hands. But digital literacy is not something we have to teach our employees or our prospects. Digital literacy is something we have to teach to leadership. It's not how to use technology, it's how to guide it, what it means, how it's changed us. I did a lot of work with GE or General Electric over the years, and the one thing that I found most fascinating is that all of their leadership teams go through mandatory reverse mentoring programs with millennials so that they can understand a day in the life of. Why do they do that? Because I'm part of Generation X. We're the lazy generation. But there's an incredible gap between millennials and management just simply because of the way that they were grown or taught, the way we grew up. And the problem is that rather than understanding it, we challenge it. The biggest disconnects, and this is just true around the world, is that management looks at millennials and says something along the lines of this: you had the world handed to you. You got an award just for showing up. You used technology at the dinner table. My parents never would have allowed me to do that. You didn't have to come up the way I came up. I didn't know a world with technology. I wasn't on my phone all the time. And millennials look at management and they say, you're so old. What are you even talking about? And suddenly we start to sound like that person. In my day, I used to do things this way. And instead, this. But see, to them, it really is the best party ever. So much so that they're probably telling everybody about it. Or they're talking to each other. I can't figure out which one it is. And our first response to this is to laugh. And it's funny. But it's different. And it's not changing. And things aren't going to go backwards. We're never going to use a rotary phone again. I'm sorry. We have to understand what captures that attention on that screen, because I can assure you that after going through and studying UX and behavior before writing that book, it took me longer, by the way, to study that than it did to write it. I can assure you that what we think reality is and what it is are in fact different. And it's also very counterintuitive. Just going to play those around. We're always affected by what's new. It changes behavior. It changes norms. Norms evolve, therefore our policies, our governance, our direction, our mission and purpose all have to evolve. Has to get in front of this, not react to it, because technology is not slowing down. It affects us differently every single day. That means that we're either going to react to it for the rest of our careers, or we're going to get in front of it and usher technology in ways that teach and help people the way that they want to or the way that they do learn. I spent a lot of time with kids. There was a saying that if you want to learn about how the future of technology is going to affect us, you have to see how kids are using it today. The first word that comes to mind is scary. But it's also tangible, it's approachable. You get to really understand a lot of why they do what they do. One of the most interesting effects of digital is not that complex at all. It's just made them more empowered to get information when they want it. When they get information when they want it, they start to expect it. When they start to expect it, they start to become empowered. When they become empowered, they become demanding. If things do not present themselves, we call it the lazy web, to them, they're not really going to go out for it. They used to, but now social and mobile has made it incredibly feasible for information to come to them. One of the founders of Twitter, Biz Stone, just launched a new app recently where people can post pictures of something and ask a question: what is this? And answers will come flooding in instead of Googling it, right? Something as simple as a shift like that. This is a quote from a friend of mine that actually I felt really inspired by, because I feel the same way. It's the same with the fountain pen example. the pace of how we use technology as a human being is increasing so rapidly that we're actually starting to be groomed more of a culture of skimming information rather than diving deep. As he says, he used to be a scuba diver in a sea of words, and now he just blazes along the top on a jet ski. And when you realize that there's a sense of shallowness to how we process information, we're already starting on the wrong foot. I wrote a 4,000-word essay on the decline of the Japanese economy. Spent so much time researching it for a presentation that I was giving out in Tokyo. And I published it to share it with everybody. And one of the first comments on my blog was this: "Too long, didn't read." What I find fascinating about TLDR is that they can't even say too long, didn't read. That there has to be that. This is the way that I've learned to see the world, through the eyes of others. Yes, I still write 4,000-word essays, but I also am incredibly gifted now with 140 characters on Twitter. It makes me rethink how I write, how I construct a sentence, what makes something gripping, what makes something shareable, what connects with somebody, what are the words, how many syllables. Why? 6 minutes is the average attention span before reaching for a device. I'd love to say that this is just about teenagers, but I can't even get past 6 minutes these days. I must have checked Twitter and Facebook and surfed the web maybe 1,000 times putting this presentation together. I've had to employ the Pomodoro method. Are you familiar with the Pomodoro method? It's the kitchen tomato timer that clicks for 25 minutes. I can't break my work unless I hear that ding, and then I give myself a 5-minute break. It's incredible that I can't get through a day without that. And society is changing to cater to this attention span, or lack thereof. Every headline, if you noticed, looks something like this. Every article is missing words, because now they have animated GIFs and pictures. And it's fascinating. Every headline is something along these lines. Because media companies are realizing that in order to capture attention, nothing new, it has to be sensational. What's different is that in a digital culture, it's evolving so rapidly that it's moving beyond us. You're all responsible for connecting whatever expertise, whatever insight to your colleagues, and they're already starting to learn and share and communicate differently than you. It's almost foreign. That means we have to learn a new language. I want to share this example with you because this is what inspired me to think differently about the book design. It's this YouTube video that features a 1-year-old baby who is using an iPad intuitively. Her father thought it would be funny if he gave her a magazine. To his daughter, a magazine is an iPad that doesn't work. And so it will be for the rest of her life. I was struck by this because she's digital first, I'm analog first. I've had to learn every technology revolution that has come my way. Last night we were joking over dinner about the old, big, bulky cell phones that we used to carry around. And it's funny because that wasn't that long ago. But we've had to learn digital, and we're proud of ourselves for keeping up. But she is going to have to learn analog. And she's only going to have to learn analog because we insist on not letting it go. And so we push ourselves onto her when it's not intuitive and it's not natural. We have to change how we approach anything from the perspective of someone who's digital first. I refer to this as Generation C because what I had learned in my research over the years is it wasn't just about Gen Y or Gen Z, yet we think it is. Those millennials. Generation C is not bound by age. Generation C stands for connected. Generation C represents a digital lifestyle, and it affects each and every one of us. If you use a smartphone, if you use a tablet, if you use Facebook, you start to change. I have studied 55-year-old people who exhibit millennial-like behaviors in how they read, how they approach decisions, how they get information, the journey that they're on in terms of discovery. It is crazy how similar they become. And my point is this, is that the group of people that you're trying to connect with who think differently is actually bigger than we know. And what science is showing us is that we're kind of smart. We adapt. Our brains get wired differently as we learn all of this stuff. So you're learning more on the outside than you are on the inside of your organization. This is why how you roll out new programs, how you develop your strategies, need to adapt from the way things were to what they could be. The data that we have access to, the insights that we have access to, have never been more profound. Yet, even how we process data and insight in our own organization is broken. I go to a lot of organizations and I see these 3-ring binders on shelves that have so much rich data that have never been looked at. Because decisions about what should be are based on experience or gut or instinct. And if you think about that iPad and magazine example, that means our strategies, our experiences, our gut, our instinct are all working against us. We can't approach decisions that way anymore. They have to be informed. They have to be empathetic. They have to be human. If it's one thing I've learned, I said it earlier, that most things that I think are right are counterintuitive. I'm often wrong. And when I learn, it changes what I would do next. And when I learn and change what I do next, I create a splinter on a path of legacy that gets us in a new direction. Because the needs and the values of a connected employee or a student or a human being are changing. They're changing so much that they're going to affect the economy around the world. They're changing so much that they don't want to buy a house anymore. It doesn't make sense. They don't want to buy a car. They want to drive what's called the sharing economy. They're riddled with debt from a previous generation that told them that that's what you're just supposed to do, to learn. Things are changing. This is true for your employees. This is true for customers. So we have to reverse engineer it. And that starts with small steps. I'll ask Dawn to share this presentation with you because I'm not going to go through these bullets. But these were things that I had found that some of the most successful companies were starting to think about in how they approached learning. The thing that I found fascinating, and this is the point that I want to share with you, is that human resources started to live up to its name. They started to realize that the processes that they have, the way that employees are rewarded, the ways that they're managed, suck. And they do because they're not relevant anymore. And so to improve a foundation for learning, they actually had to be more meaningful, more relevant, more incentivizing. We're asking people to do things differently. We're trying to teach expertise to older generations while still trying to cater to younger generations. That means we're asking them to do incredible things. And to do incredible things, they have to know that it's worth their time because, and I know that some of you might not agree with this, is that what technology is doing to us is turning us into accidental narcissists. Not a bad thing, but you're at the center of your own ecosystem. Things revolve around you. Information revolves around you. You can get whatever you want like that. Therefore, how an organization supports, rewards, nourishes an employee relationship all have to change. This is called How Computers Are Born. I think it's funny, but it's also a visualization of the new approach that I'd like you to take back to your work. And that is born digital. If you had to approach something that would never have catered to you or your parents, but instead cater to someone who is digital first, what would that look like? If you could change legacy for the better, what would that look like? Write down what that would look like. Because if you can't articulate it, then you can't become a champion. If you can't become a champion, people can't follow you to create a sense of urgency to bring about change. That vision is where everything begins. The approach we bring to this is much more optimistic than it is pessimistic. We tend to get caught up in critical thinking. That sounds great, but, oh, I'd love to do that, but. Instead, it's more of an approach, I like that, and. I see what you're talking about, and. Because you have to do this. If you do not do this, then you contribute to digital Darwinism. Things have to change, and we have to be positive and productive about it. Once you can articulate what your vision is, you also need to document all of the little challenges and hurdles and big hurdles that you're going to have. Who are the people standing in your way? What are the processes standing in your way? Because you're going to have to address those. They're not going to address themselves. So it's an incredible opportunity to actually have your job. You don't get to just connect with people. You get to change how your organization looks at, grooms, and rewards people. You get to essentially become a user experience designer for life. Not just in how an app is developed, or a page is developed, or a program is developed, but how a human being interacts with what it is you're trying to impart. And that's magical. I just wish universities and academics would start thinking this way. Because this is what technology is doing to us. Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I might remember. Involve me and I will understand. Learning is an experience. It is not a process. And to create an experience takes design. Takes empathy. Takes passion. Because learning never stops. As an analyst and as an anthropologist, I can tell you that the title that I should put on my business card is student. Because when I think I know enough about a subject, I stop learning. And when I stop learning, something happens. That is, the world continues to evolve. So we are all students. Learning is continuous. And it's just the beginning. And that's a great thing. The future of learning is about experiences. The future of innovation takes heart, takes emotion, takes passion. The future of learning is actually up to you. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you. That was plenty to think about, and also a few good things to laugh at. I tell you what, if you are ever stuck with a slide for a presentation, an internet cat will always go a long way. When I was a young man, I'm going to just ask Brian a question, and then I'm going to ask for some questions from the floor. When I was a young man, about 19, I was backpacking in Africa, and I went to Saqqara, which is where they built some of the first stone buildings. And I was amazed that these stone buildings had columns, and the columns could have just been bits of stone that were put up, but there were columns that were carved to look like palm trees. And they were carved to look like palm trees, we believe, and these were several thousand years old, not because that was a decoration, but because that's what those things that held up the roof looked like. Because up to that point, they'd always used palm trees. And so, of course, if you were going to use stone instead, well, it had to look the same way. That's part of how we think about things. We're always carrying with us that legacy of how we think and how we've done things in the past. If we're going to go out and change things at work in the future, how do we overcome the legacy in others and ourselves, which is an overwhelming legacy that learning should be how it's always been done. It's what happened in the first 15 years of our lives. We sit down, we listen to somebody talk, we write it down, we go away, we do something with it. The Jesuits say, give me a man by the age of 7, give me a child by the age of 7, I'll give you the man. But we're talking here about indoctrination for the first 21 years of somebody's life. That's a lot of learning to get out of somebody's head. It's a big challenge if we're talking about shifting people's perceptions. So very quickly, what's the answer?
I think it comes back to that quote. I think the first step, it's not an easy answer, by the way. I mean, this is what I do for a living. It's incredibly emotional, and it's arduous, and it's political. But in every case, when change starts to happen, when somebody realizes that there could be another way, it's because there was some point of self-reflection where they didn't have to admit any wrong or any fault,
right.
But instead that, from an optimism standpoint, that they could be the person who brings about something that's valuable to the organization. So they almost have to feel like the champion,
right.
Even though you're the champion.
Right.
And it was almost like reverse psychology, but it's that first step of seeing, not through your own eyes, because that's a hard one, but seeing the possibility. This is why I use, for example, a lot of times the baby.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's really clear that it's different than you, but you don't have to say that you're wrong. You just see that there's another way.
That's a great way of putting it. The emotion is so important. If you want people to change, goodness knows, some changes are great. We get married, we move house, we enjoy life, but asking people to change can be very confrontational. But yes, if we don't make it so they lose, that's got to be the first step, hasn't it? That's really good advice. Any questions for Brian in all this? We've got Steve at the front. Go ahead. And if you want to just put up a hand or wave while Steve's asking his question, then we can get the microphone over to you so we can keep things moving. Go ahead.
Brian, I think we all enjoyed that tremendously, and I think we could have all listened to you for a lot longer. I think we're just going to have to get your book. But you mentioned something which has been retweeted several times already, the idea that learning is not a process, but an experience. Now, for some people, processes are, you can't really separate them. Could you elaborate on what the difference is between the two?
Yeah, I live in a world where there's playbooks and rule books and style guides and process guides, and it's almost like no one can make a decision without referring to this, because it's the way that they were trained, it's the way that things are, it's how they're measured for success, it's just the norm. And here comes some guy saying, hey, learning is experiences. You got to change your processes. It's a confrontation. However, I use the words reverse engineering like the word water. It's because it's become part of my life. So when I see how, let's just say, with the book, if I were to help an author write a book differently, I would have to look at what the outcome is, the desired state and the desired effect, so cause and effect, and then work backwards to rewrite how I got there. And that is what I'm talking about in terms of processes, is the steps that we take to do things differently have to be written. They're not going to write themselves. And I think a lot of times I find challenges where people expect those to be redone. And they say, yes, they need to be redone, but they're the actual person who could do it, and they should do it. And that's why I believe that we can't change the world until we change ourselves.
That's a really good point. Let's pick up at the back.
Hi, yeah. The Generation C, obviously they've grown up with the technology, they're used to it. Do you feel... Is that me?
Obviously, we're not.
I agree.
I'm certainly not. Do you feel, as well as being digitally native, they're also more able to adapt to changing technologies? And if they are, if they're faster at adapting than we are, how can we possibly keep up with them?
So these are all million-dollar questions, by the way. To me, the answer is that you don't. You don't try to keep up with them and what technology they use. You have to keep up with why and how it affects them. So, for example, millennials are driving the ephemeral web. If you're familiar with that, it is the web that disappears, right? They're doing this not because of Snapchat, right?
Sorry, does everyone know what Snapchat is? Because they might not do.
Who doesn't know what Snapchat is? And I will share. Okay. If you use Instagram, if you use Facebook, you post a picture, people respond, it lives on the internet forever. We know privacy, right, is an issue. We talk about privacy all the time. The thing is about younger generations is that they don't think about privacy the way that you and I think about privacy. So Snapchat is an app that's like Instagram, where you share a picture. When someone gets it, they have 5 seconds to look at it, and then it disappears. You can imagine the types of pictures that are shared. Instead of redefining privacy, they redefine technology to suit their needs so that they could feel safer in how they use the internet. There is going to be the next Snapchat, but it'll be because of the behavior that's driving it. It doesn't matter about the app. It doesn't matter about what technology they're using. It's how they change and why they change is a slower process, and it's more manageable. Even just understanding that they look at privacy differently, therefore they act differently, we've already made 100 steps in the right direction.
It's a good point. I'm keeping an eye out for any more hands going up. We've got a hand there, if you could bring the mic over there. While the mic's going over, very quickly, GE, great example, reverse mentoring. Is there anything else that we can learn from GE? They have a great culture of learning internally, don't they?
Well, I also study what it takes to build a culture of innovation. You know, so learning is a big part of that. GE has a culture of innovation. They have an incredible leadership series. So they're actually grooming their best and brightest to be the future of GE. It's an active investment. Yep. It's a curriculum. It's part of a program. So it starts with how they measure success, how they define success, what the processes and steps are to get to this defined success. It's actually bigger than learning. It's just an entire culture of innovation and leadership. Another company to look at is Tata Group.
Yeah.
They have an incredible culture of innovation. And a lot of people will say, look at Tata Group. But I'll say, look at how they rewrote the HR programs for employee rewards and engagement and how they hold managers accountable for evoking innovation out of their employees. So that means that they had to hold managers to a higher standard, hold them accountable, otherwise they're the block. They're the blockade, and that's a problem.
And that's fair enough. Managers, after all, have their job to do, and if you give them something else to do, unless there's a strong incentive and perhaps a stick as well as a carrot, then they won't do it. But again and again, we always come back to managers being where things happen or don't, and that's usually where we can make change happen or not. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Thinking about Generation C again, and thinking about learning in a global environment, from your experience, do you think Generation C differs around the world? And my second question is, associated with that, do you think Generation C is really defined as an age thing? And I'm thinking about sort of silver surfers, you could also say we're a Generation C, so it's not necessarily defined as how young or how old you are, it's your ability to embrace technology.
So I'm going to answer your second question first. Generation C is not an age group. It's demographics versus psychographics. Generation C is a lifestyle. So silver surfers, part of Generation C. My mother is more connected than I am, and it scares me. To your first question, could you give me that one more time?
Does Generation C
differ around the globe?
Across the world?
Okay.
Yep.
I'm sure I'm going to open this one up for debate. So we'll have to take it to Twitter, I guess, afterward. This is my opinion, because this is happening now, so I don't have facts to support this. My opinion is that Generation C is a global phenomenon that's creating a new culture unto itself. So if you live in Germany, but you live a connected lifestyle, chances are that you have at least 12 different countries represented in your friends list on any given social network. That means that you start to employ a more digital, a more internet culture. That means that when you're online, you behave similar to someone in Italy, to someone in Florida, which means that when you go back into the real world, you carry this internet culture back into real life, and that's what's causing all of this dramatic changes within organizations, within schools. So I think what's happening is that we're creating a global culture because of this connectedness.
Provided the people are connected.
Yes.
So if there's a place where they're not connected, it's not happening.
Well, yeah, right. This is true. Although we see in some of the most impoverished areas, even access to a mobile phone starts to change.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the great areas of innovation in terms of mobile technology right now is Kenya, because they have an economy driven almost entirely by the availability of applications and sharing money over phones. 30% of Kenya's GDP goes over mobile phones. From person to person, individual transactions, people getting paid, rent getting paid, and back again. That's something you wouldn't necessarily think about. And of course, they're doing other stuff on that phone, which is making them a digitally connected generation. I'm going to ask, unless there's one from the floor, I've got a burning question which nobody's asked. Oh, go on. Yes. Let's get the microphone over very quickly. Then I'm going to throw a last question at you.
So while the microphone's going, I will say that it creates a splinter in how we teach, because that we can't ignore people who don't live a connected lifestyle.
Yeah.
But I can tell you this I do know from research, is that the more time you spend trying to learn about someone different than you, the more it inspires how you just connect with human beings anyway. So everybody benefits.
Thank you, Brian. It's kind of similar to the question I was going to ask, which you spoke about leadership and management and how you kind of got a gift for, I'd call it walking that tightrope of disruption and confrontation. And it's a problem that I've actually come across. So I'd like to know if you can give any tips as to how you do that.
Just to be clear, how you can disrupt without, if I can put it this way, getting too much in people's faces and getting too much pushback. Yeah.
I get this question all the time, and you'd think by now I would have a great answer. It's a tightrope for a reason. There's no one answer. I guess I will tell you that the traits I've learned to embrace are that of passion. Passion's incredibly contagious. Optimism is very contagious. Even the most pessimistic or skeptical people plug in when they can see that you're really inspired by something. But on the same token, you have to also be a lawyer and a politician. And by a lawyer, I mean you just have to make the case. It takes evidence. When you combine evidence with zeal or passion, it's kind of hard to argue against you. But the politician part is the part that I find to be the most effective in all of this. And it's about what you do in between those formal meetings, who you talk to in the hallways, the emails you send, so that you make things look that it's bigger than you. Did you hear everybody's talking about this? You just build momentum around it. And it's an art and a science, mostly art.
That sounds great. It sounds to me it's about people, it's about optimism, it's about showing evidence, it's about passion, and I'd say a lot of it is about being the lawyer, as you say, and being able to have your stuff together. And strangely enough, that spells out people, almost. We just need an E to put on the end. So that could be the anagram of the conference.
There you go.
And I was actually going to ask that question. What do we do next? How do we go and make this difficult thing happen? But thank you very much for asking it. And Brian, thank you very much for answering it. We're now up against the clock. And I've learnt a lot in a very reflective way. I have read very recently Nicholas Carr's book, The Shallows, from which those quotes came. I totally recommend it. I try to read books sometimes which confront me with things I won't necessarily like. I thought I wasn't going to like The Shallows. On the contrary, I enjoyed it immensely. I'm certainly going out and buy your analog tablet book, What's the Future of Business, because I suspect that that's one I will enjoy and expect to enjoy. We've had a lot to think about today. We carry on that for the next 2 days. Let's just take a moment now to thank our keynote speaker, Brian Solis. Brian, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.